Hello, folks. Nice to see you again. I'm Dustin Cormier. We are continuing our reading today on Pluto, the Evolutionary Journey of the Soul. We're talking today about Pluto and the four natural evolutionary conditions. This is coming from our more technical reading of Pluto as it relates to the North and South Node, and Pluto as it relates to other planets, and what those aspects of other planets mean in relationship with Pluto. Now, in terms of mitigating factors for what Pluto can either come with a cataclysmic crystallization, obliteration pattern that happens not continually, but in these gross confrontations, in like stressful, usually encouraged through stressful aspects to Pluto and stressful aspects from Pluto. Or it can have a continual smooth effect with less of that staccato, painful confrontation pattern, but more of a fluid, constant undertaking upon oneself to engage with the Plutonian futuristic aspect. And when one takes it upon themselves, it's if they understand the sufferings they're going through and they suffer less thereby. So that's what we mean when we say mitigating factors to the extremes. Mitigating factors that reduce the obsessive internal resistance to the things which Pluto represents. And that's why we are born in one of what, he could have described this in any way, but Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about 4 evolutionary conditions in which we can find ourselves employing our karma in the universe. So, this is Pluto and the 4 natural evolutionary conditions. The conditions of evolutionary growth, states of evolutionary comprehension. So, another important mitigating factor to consider are the 4 natural evolutionary conditions. We must determine the evolutionary condition of an individual in order to understand at what level they are operating. The natural evolutionary conditions will not be revealed by simply looking at the birth chart. Any number of people can be born at the same time and place and have similar charts. But each will be expressing their own state of soul development and using the natal chart potential in different ways. I'm sorry. Working out some junk today. Not every person with a 9th house Pluto, as an example, will be a metaphysical or philosophical master. That placement could translate into a master car salesperson who follows traditional religious dictates. We must interact in some way with the individual in order to evaluate and determine what evolutionary condition he or she is within. The evolutionary condition will determine the behavioral manifestations and responses to the evolutionary necessities of Pluto and the nodal axis. This principle of the 4 natural evolutionary states has its origins in ancient India. The following classifications and terminology have been updated to reflect modern civilization and current sociological theory. These 4 conditions, within the context of the modern world, are empirically observable by anyone. So these 4 states are as follows. 1. The dimly or de-evolved state. 2 or 3% of the human race is characterized by those people who are either just evolving into human consciousness from other species kingdoms, such as the animal state, or are in a de-evolved evolutionary condition due to prior life karmic causes. Those just evolving into human consciousness have a very dim sense of personal awareness, a basic sense of occupying time and space. These people will appear to be relatively stupefied. In some cases, this condition will be associated with mental deficiencies, cretinism, or retardation. In other cases, mental deficiencies can be found in individuals who, because of past actions in other lives, are de-evolving for a lifetime or two. When one becomes adept at understanding the evolutionary and karmic causes implicated in the birth chart, the reasons for this situation will become apparent. The reasons or karmic causes are different in each case. So, next, number 2. The herd state. 75% of the human race exists in this condition, which is characterized by individuals whose identities are a mere extension of societal norms, beliefs, customs, and taboos. In fact, this condition is the mainstream of society itself. It is society. These people do not seriously question what they are told to believe or think. And if they do question, the answer will be a consensus answer as prescribed by society. In other words, if astronomers tell us that astrology is bogus, then these people will say astrology is bogus without thinking about it on an independent basis. Those who have spent a long time in this state will develop the capacity to lead it. Will develop the capacity to lead it. It's interesting. 3 is called the individuated state. Approximately 20% of the human race exists in this condition, which is characterized by those people who who question the beliefs, customs, norms, and taboos of society. These people seek to discover their own individuality as distinct from society. They desire to know and act upon their own natural laws, beliefs, values, needs, customs, and taboos. And they desire to discover these things from within themselves. A vibration of independence will permeate these individuals as they value the right of self-discovery and freedom. One sec. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, number 4, the spiritual state. 2 or 3% of human beings will attempt to understand their own life and others' lives in a universal and holistic context. In fact, these people desire to understand the nature of all creation in this context, and commonly link themselves to spiritual ideas or teachings as the guiding principles in life. They are attempting to discover and therefore align themselves with timeless values, beliefs, and truths that apply at all times. In its highest condition, this state produces what are called avatars, or spiritual masters and teachers. That includes the likes of Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Muhammad, Moses, and so forth. This state represents those individuals who have eliminated or are in the process of eliminating all separating or externalizing desires. I would like to note that there's a correlation in my mind. He doesn't say directly, but I believe there's a correlation here between the 4 Hindu castes. The first state, being the dimly evolved or de-evolved state, represents the peasant, the outcast class of the caste system. Then the herd state represents the peasant class. Sorry, I kind of did that wrong. The first one, the de-evolved state, is like the peasant class. The second one, the mercantile state, is like the herd. The mercantile class is like the herd state. The warrior class is the individuated state, the third, and then the Brahman class is the 4th state. I think it kind of relates. Just a thought I had, but I mean, those things do mean different things to astrology, but they're considered to be the elements, the case system, I mean. So, I guess I shouldn't necessarily claim that. It's just a thought I had. Keep that in mind. No, I'll keep going with the text, just to keep on where we're at. These 4 natural evolutionary conditions are not rigidly delineated classifications. There is movement within and between them. For example, an individual may be at a transitional junction between the herd state and the individuated state, and they may express some characteristics of both. When sharing these ideas with another person or counseling a client, we must adjust our interpretation and language to reflect that individual's reality. I cannot overstate the importance of understanding how these evolutionary factors relates to the birth chart, because we can't really read the individual, the person that we're talking to, without absorbing ourselves in their language, transmitting it through their language and reality and understanding. The 3 reactions to right. So we have 3 reactions to the evolutionary impulse. Okay? People tend to react to their evolutionary necessities and karmic requirements in one of 3 ways. These 3 possible reactions determine how the evolutionary process will work in our lives. They are as follows. 1, it actually just shows them right here. 1, to resist the evolutionary karmic requirements altogether. 2, to respond wholeheartedly and desire to understand what the lessons are for this life and go for it in a totally non-resistant way. That's really the binary of the 2 extremes. And 3, to be willing to change in some ways, yet resist changing other dynamics because of fear of the unknown. The first response is a reflection of the desire to maintain a separateness from the source. It's the absolute chrysalis of desire to be separate from the source. The second response is a reflection of the desire to know the source, to be absorbed in it, to let it come through in my experience, the gnosis. The third response is a combination of both and is the most common choice, the most common response. People aren't usually these two extremes. We change a little each lifetime. This is why evolution of the soul, the progressive elimination of separating desires, is such a slow process for most. So now that all that's been said, the next thing we're going to be looking at is the 4 ways Pluto affects evolution in our lives. Kind of continuing on the same theme related in the title of this video. Jeffrey Wolf Green tells us that the 4 primary ways in which Pluto affects or instigates the evolutionary intent or process are. It's 4 primary ways. 1. By producing emotional shocks in which some behavioral pattern or life situation is forcefully removed from our lives. This process is associated with cataclysmic change and produces an evolutionary leap. This situation always occurs when we have resisted the cumulative evolutionary forces to the extent that this effect must occur in order to enforce the required growth. A classic example is Nixon and the Watergate affair. 2. Another way which Pluto affects evolution in our lives. Number 2. By creating a situation in which we form a relationship to something that we perceive we need. This something can be anything: a new friend, a new love, a body of knowledge contained in a book or seminar, the initiation of a new goal, and so forth. The point here is that by forming a relationship to something that symbolizes that which we think we need, an evolutionary process occurs. That which we think we need implies something that we do not already have. By forming a relationship to that something, we become that which we need. The psychological process involved here is one of osmosis, Pluto. By forming the relationship, we absorb into ourselves that which we need. A simple example of this process is this. You are now reading this book that you bought because it was relevant or sounded interesting to you. Gosh. I've got like a thing in the worst spot. So, a simple example of this is that you're now reading this book that you bought because it was relevant or sounded interesting to you. Perhaps the title piqued your curiosity. Maybe you thought you would learn something that you desired to learn. Beyond this book, astrology itself as a subject would have represented this to you. By forming a relationship to astrology or this book, through the process of osmosis, you have learned something that you did not know before. By forming the relationship, your own personal limitations, your existing reality, your self-definition and self-concept were encountered. The relationships that we form in this way help us transmute, metamorphose, grow, and evolve beyond those existing limitations into new levels of awareness and self-definition. This process is associated with non-cataclysmic change, slow yet progressive evolution. Cool. It's giving you the positive and negative way to deal with it on each point. Now, next one, number 3, how Pluto affects us and how Pluto affects evolution in our lives. Way number 3. Pluto affects evolution in our lives by producing or creating situations in our lives in which we become aware of some external or internal source of stagnation or limitation, blocking further growth. This process is quite different from process number 2, which involves no particular crisis. It is simple yet steady growth. The condition we are dealing with in process number 3, on the other hand, includes those cycles or times in which we become aware of some internal or external block preventing further growth and need to find out the source of the block. This process implies a crisis in varying degrees of magnitude. The awareness of the block does not imply or mean that there is an awareness of the origin or source on which it is based. It is precisely this lack of awareness that induces the crisis. This process can have the effect of mobilizing our whole attention in order to focus on the block. This focus of attention can be so intense that everything else in our lives is excluded until we figure out the source of the block. This process is extremely similar to the dormant volcano that suddenly turns active. At some point, an eruption will occur that has the effect of transforming the volcano and its surroundings. In the same way, the steady buildup of pressure and the singularity of conscious attention and focus produces an eruption of the subconscious contents into our subjective consciousness. We become aware, through the knowledge produced in the eruption, of what the block is. As this occurs, we evolve because the source of the block has been removed in our awareness. We proceed with our life in a new and transformed way because of this cataclysmic evolution. So that was the third way. Next, we have the fourth way in which Pluto affects evolution in our lives. Number 4. Pluto affects evolution in our lives by producing or creating a situation in which we become aware of a new capacity or capability that has been latent or dormant. This process is triggered at various points in our lives through internal or external conditions that give birth to some new impulse, idea, thought, or desire. The process of actualizing or developing the new capacity creates an evolutionary or growth effect. A simple example. President Carter became aware of his desire and perceived the capacity to be president when Pluto was transiting his 12th house Libra sun. The process of fulfilling or actualizing that desire and capacity certainly produced growth and personal evolution for him. The process is associated with non-cataclysmic change, but requires perseverance and will to actualize the perceived capability. Cool. An important point is that these 4 processes do not necessarily occur as isolated or separate experiences. One process can trigger or lead to another. As an example, an individual may become aware of a latent capability or capacity at a certain juncture in his or her life. This awareness can then lead to the discovery of a block in a related area that may then lead to a crisis that forces the removal or metamorphosis of that block. The three possible reactions to the evolutionary and karmic necessities described before are closely connected to these four ways that Pluto affects or instigates our evolutionary requirements. As an example, consider an individual who has Pluto aspected to all the other planets and who reacts by resisting growth, change, and the evolutionary requirements of his or her life. This reaction could clearly set up the individual for the evolutionary process described in Condition 1, emotional shocks that lead to the forced removal of behavioral patterns or associations, and as a result, bringing about an evolutionary leap because of the forced removal. We all have, so that was the first evolutionary that was the first type of reaction to the evolutionary impulse applied through the first method mentioned, the first way in which Pluto affects evolution in our lives, the removal. We all have choices to make in our lives. Those choices are reflected in our desires. Desires reflect our evolutionary state or condition and the reasons for that state or condition. The responsibility for these conditions is our own. There are no victims. Nixon was not a victim. His life situation and experience reflected his own evolutionary condition, needs, and lessons. And the same is true for all of us. The assessment of an individual's general evolutionary condition and way of reacting to the evolutionary process must be correlated with the individual's socio-political context. This sociological consideration is important because environmental factors condition how we view ourselves and life in general. To better understand the karmic condition, we should determine why the individual chose the environment and for what reasons. At the end of Chapter 2, this point will be illustrated when we discuss the chart of Adolf Hitler in this book. If you wish to learn more about sociological astrology, I would suggest you read Holistic Astrology by Noel Till, available from TIA Publications. Now, since we've gotten to that, ooh, yeah, we're kicking butt. Okay. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We were just talking about the 4 natural evolutionary conditions, as well as the 3 ways in which we typically react to the evolutionary impulse. And finally, we learned about the 4 ways that Pluto affects evolution in our lives. Good little 30-minute lesson. I hope you guys dug it. Next up, we're just going to do a quick little word on Pluto retrograde, and then we're going to get into the final afterthoughts of the meaning of Pluto in an astrology chart. For those of you watching live, thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you in just like, pretty much we're just going to keep going right into this Pluto retrograde.